Let's go straight across to Shireen Ban, who joins us now with a very special guest. Shireen, over to you. Well, after a 9-hour-long board meeting of the Reserve Bank of India, some decisions have been taken, others have been pushed forward. Joining us now to discuss the impact and the implications of what the Reserve Bank board decided on yesterday is the former Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, Montek Singh Ahluwalia. So, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18. Well, post that 9-hour board meeting, it looks like a truce, if we may call it an uneasy truce, has been arrived at. Some decisions have been taken, but others have been postponed to a later date. December 14th is the next board meeting of the Reserve Bank of India. To start with, what did you make of the statement that was issued by the RBI in general, but specifically on the economic capital framework? The government and the Reserve Bank will together set up a committee to look at this issue, but we just heard there from the Niti Aayog Vice Chairman saying very clearly he believes that this will go into execution in this financial year itself.
Well, I mean, I haven't seen all these individual statements, but let me just say that, you know, I think the press built up what looked like a conflict situation. And I think that would have been very unfortunate. So I'm sure that financial markets welcome the fact that we don't have that kind of conflict. There's been a long board meeting. They've agreed to do certain things. There's not a sense of the RBI being pushed to doing things that it really doesn't want to do. You know, on the other hand, I mean, it's clear that between the Finance Ministry and the Reserve Bank, historically, I mean, there's always been a certain amount of tension. I don't think anybody minds that. This needs to be managed in a way which doesn't look as if the system is breaking down. And I'm glad that the way things have turned out, nobody is saying that the system is breaking down. Let's see what they do in the future.
Specifically on the economic capital framework, sir, because that has been a contentious issue. And now the decision is that a committee will be set up to look at that issue and look into the future implications of this framework. What would your expectation be? We've had committees in the past examine this issue. What would your expectation be in this context, and given the fact that we've got an election coming up in May next year?
If you're referring to the issue of how large the RBI's capital reserves should be and whether some portion of this can be transferred, if that's what you're talking about, you know, my feeling is that this whole fuss of trying to make an economic issue of this is not actually well grounded. I mean, the honest truth is that if you take, the RBI can always print money. Stability means that the total money that it prints, what you might call the increase of reserve money in the system, should be constrained to whatever is felt to be consistent with a reasonable rate of inflation and growth and so on. Now, if you take away a lot of money and give it to the government under whatever pretext, and if the Reserve Bank maintain stability, they'll just reduce the amount of reserve money that they issue into the rest of the system. So, you know, the net effect from the government's point of view is not particularly different. I personally do not think that raiding the Reserve Bank reserves is a credible way of appearing to reduce the fiscal deficit. You know, that's an accounting trick, actually. Because the fact of the matter is these very large reserves, so-called, most of it is foreign currency revaluation reserves. You can always get the Reserve Bank to transfer money, but the Reserve Bank has to control the total amount of money that it prints. So if you take away more through this window, they'll have to squeeze somewhere else. And if they squeeze somewhere else, it's the same thing as you're increasing your fiscal deficit and crowding out the private sector. So it's not as if this is a free lunch, that some calculation here will enable you to get something, get a real resource that was lying unused. That's not actually true.
Okay, well...
now, what the committee does, all the charter, I mean, I'm not really aware of.
Okay, well, time permitting, I'll come back to the accounting probabilities and possibilities of this money. But Mr. Ahluwalia, first let me begin by defending my fraternity. The media did not start this war at all. There was a Viralacharya speech which pointed out that if governors resign because injustice is done to the reserves of the central bank, it has had repercussions. And my sense is, from Reserve Bank sources, that speech was done only because all methods of persuasion had not succeeded. And we then came to know that consultation had started under Section 7. A section which the government has so far never used in in over 70 years of the bank's existence. Thereafter, there is a tweet from the finance ministry criticizing the kind of speech made by the deputy governor. This was all out in the open. So there was a misunderstanding, a fight, a serious disagreement, a threat of using Section 7. Do you think at the end of this turmoil, the Reserve Bank has come out looking weaker?
Well, let me say that, I don't want to comment on tweets. Mind you, tweets have now become an established currency of communication at very high levels of government all over the world. But I still resist the temptation to react to tweets. It's not my idea of how government should be done. However, let me just make one or two points. One is that, I do not think that on issues of the Reserve Bank and the Finance Ministry, the world should be informed by quietly by officials talking about it. I mean, frankly, I think in many jurisdictions, the governor and the finance minister meet periodically. And I think that's very important. Leaving it to lower level officials is not a good idea. So personally, I mean, I've always felt that, once a month or something like that, the governor of the Reserve Bank and the finance minister should meet. Their principal deputies should lay out what are the issues they're going to discuss, so that at any given time, people are not speculating on the basis of what lower level officials are saying, but that the two are in communication at the highest level. I mean, that is very, very crucial. Now, obviously, if the two really disagree, then since the government is sovereign, it always has more power. But, we ought to have some reassurance that what we are reading in the newspaper is the outcome of discussions at a high level, not at a lower level. And I open the newspaper and I find unnamed officials in the Reserve Bank are saying something, unnamed officials in the Finance Ministry are saying something. No. Frankly, I don't think this is a sensible way of communicating to the markets. No. And I think the basic idea that, look, we're now integrated with the global economy, we've got to conduct ourselves the way the rest of the world does. No,
Mr. Ahluwalia, I mean, let me tell you that I'm quoting on the record statements. Viralacharya's statement was on the record. The DEA secretaries was on the record. Mr. Gadkari criticized the Reserve Bank for not releasing enough money for road projects about 48 hours ago. That was on the record. This is not unnamed sources. What I'm asking you is that should Section 7 have been even threatened to be used? Is that weakening both institutions and particularly the Reserve Bank?
Well, look, any legal use of an existing framework cannot in itself be objected to. I do not know, for example, what is the basis of the statement that Section 7 was threatened to be used. Secondly, it's not very clear to me at what level Section 7 can be threatened. There have been disputes between the Reserve Bank and the Government of India before. I mean, when Dr. Manmohan Singh was the governor of the Reserve Bank and Mrs. Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister, there was an occasion, I think Dr. Singh has written about it, where the Finance Ministry decided to take away from the Reserve Bank the power to grant entry to foreign banks to open branches. That decision was actually sent to the cabinet. And it's the cabinet that actually took that decision, whereupon Dr. Singh, and he's written about this, Dr. Singh wrote to the Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, and said that, look, if this decision is implemented, I will have to resign. And Mrs. Gandhi actually reversed the cabinet's decision. So this raises an issue. There have been conflicts before, but I mean, who can trigger? What is the process for triggering Section 7? Is it simply some joint secretary can write off? Does it have to be signed off on the file by the finance minister? And secondly, what is the threat? Is a threat that if you don't do this, we'll use Section 7? These are all rather, I mean, there are uncertainties here. And to my mind, we ought to be very clear what actually has happened. At least I have not been very clear when I've read the newspapers on this. Maybe because I don't read the newspapers carefully enough and don't follow all the tweets. It's my fault.
Well, sir, let me now move forward to what is expected to happen, which is on the 14th of December, which is when the Reserve Bank Board will meet again. And what we are given to understand is that the items that could not be taken up yesterday, the governance of the Reserve Bank of India, as well as the liquidity issue, will be taken up on the 14th. Now, when it comes to governance, the thinking, and I go back again to the fact that I don't know whether this is going to be presented in some formal proposal, but the thinking within North Bloc at this point in time is that the Reserve Bank Board should be empowered, that the Reserve Bank Board members should be empowered, and the RBI should be a board-managed institution. In light of what you've seen so far play itself out, and given this thinking, what would your expectation be on the 14th of December? What would you not like to see happen?
Well, once again, I'm not sure exactly what the intentions of the government on this are. This is all speculation. But I would certainly say that the law on this is a little unclear, because there's Section 7.2 and there's Section 7.3. And one of them says that the governor can do everything, and the other one says that the board can do everything. So we do need to clarify that. I mean, I think it should be made very clear what exactly is in the powers of the board. Is it, for example, all kinds of administrative matters? Does it, for example, include technical issues, such as, for example, what sort of criteria you're going to use for lending, what sort of criteria for financing, for strengthening the banks, capital adequacy issues? Are these going to be decided by the board or not? I mean, we just need more clarity on this, that's all. Once things are clear, people will then be able to judge what is happening. In a world in which things are not clear at all, I mean, every tweet is good enough. So I feel ill-informed on this one, quite honestly.
Okay, Mr. Ahluwalia.
Well, yes, Tata, go ahead.
Okay, no, Mr. Ahluwalia, actually, if you read the press release at the end of the meeting clearly says the board, while deciding to retain the CRAR at 9%, agreed to extend the transition period to implementing Basel rules to April 2020, etc., etc. But the point is the board decided that the capital adequacy will be 9%. This introduces a new player. Until now, we never thought that the RBI board would, try and decide how much capital adequacy has to be maintained, or, what kind of banks should be constrained because they are weak. We thought this was left to the technocrats at RBI. Now that the board is an active board, should we genuinely start worrying about the composition of the board because it is such an important actor?
No, that absolutely goes without saying. I mean, if the board is not a purely decorative organization, which for many years it has been, then it's extremely important that the composition of the board and the competence and the background of the people on the board is very carefully worked out. There's no question about that.
Okay. So then that will require practically rewriting of the law. because, I mean, the Act does not really give any qualifications of the board. It merely says that the government shall appoint board members. Does the Act have to be thought through?
Well, you know, I think this is an issue which, when the Sri Krishna Committee, the Financial Sector Regulation Committee, submitted a report some years ago, the whole issue of the capacity of our regulatory institutions and how they should be strengthened and how they should be made accountable, this was discussed at great length. And actually, there was no agreement on what to do. So I think this is a sort of an unfinished business which was raised, and it's quite reasonable to address the thing seriously. Let me say, by the way, that when you say something must go to the board, I mean, for example, if the only people who can take something to the board are the Reserve Bank management, then the board is actually pronouncing on a management suggestion, and it's up to the management to accept or modify or not. So, you know, a lot of how these things are done would actually make it clear to what extent the Reserve Bank governor and deputy governors, etc., are sharing a little bit of power. I would certainly say, by the way, that in complex banking matters, I do not think that a part-time board appointed by the government should sort of, as it were, overwhelm the decisions of a professionally managed RBI.
Okay.
And secondly, if it is to comment on it substantively, it becomes extremely important that the competence of the board members is, as it were, beyond question.
Okay.
Otherwise, it becomes an opportunity to sort of raise questions and create difficulty and so forth, which is not actually very helpful.
Okay. Well, a final question to you, Mr. Ahluwalia. This, to our knowledge, is the first time that a person who is ideologically inclined to the ruling party has been appointed to the board. I don't know if there is a previous precedent of a person like Mr. Gurumurthy being appointed, who is very clearly heading a group which is aligned to the ruling party. Will this become a precedent now? Every political party that comes tries to put one of its camp followers or ideologues into the board. And wouldn't that be a worry if this became a precedent?
Well, you know, I don't want to comment on the propriety or anything of any individual. So I think on that one, I just leave that question for you to address. I mean, the important thing is that the competence of the person concerned should be established. Now, who they are aligned with and so on. But you're right about one thing, that if you set a precedent, then you can expect that in future similar things will happen. That's certainly true.
Well, I think you've addressed a lot of the contentious issues, sir, and a lot of it still continues to be in the realm of speculation. Hopefully, we will have more clarity on the 14th of December. But for this evening, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18 with your views. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, Deputy Chairperson of the Planning Commission, speaking to us on the decisions taken by the Reserve Bank Board after that 9-hour board meeting.
The Yes Bank stock tanked over 6% in trade today. This was on the back of independent director R. Chandrashekars' resignation from the bank's board late last evening. Now, this also happens to be the third person to put in his papers in less than a week. Sources tell us that the discomfort over the handling of recent events is one of the key reasons for his exit. Ritu Singh, who broke that story, is with us. Ritu, what else are you picking up?
Well, R. Chandrashekars' resignation marks the third exit from the board of Yes Bank in less than a week. And that exit, we understand, is not due to personal reasons, as initially indicated by the bank, which has now revised its statement and removed the words personal reasons from the release. Now, sources indicate that R. Chandrashekar, in his resignation letter, expressed deep concerns about recent developments at Yes Bank and dismay at the manner in which the bank has dealt with these issues, and conveyed to the bank that the environment was not conducive to him staying on any longer. Now, what are these concerns that he is referring to? We understand from sources that since the time that the RBI sent a letter to the bank cutting short Rana Kapoor's tenure as the CEO, there has been friction between the existing CEO and some of the board members on matters relating to the transition, where the bank had sought an extension for Rana Kapoor, and even the process of selecting a new CEO. So sources pointed out that the circumstances under which both Ashok Chawla and Vasant Gujrati left the bank, as well as O.P. Bhatt's resignation from the Search and Selection Committee, were all seen as worrying developments by R. Chandrashekar. But the biggest concern yet for him was the independence of the board, which we understand under the existing leadership is something that he was worried about. Rana Kapoor also, we understand, wrote to R. Chandrashekar asking him to reconsider his decision and at least serve as director until April 2019 in the interest of stability of the bank and also to avoid any adverse market impact. But R. Chandrashekar declined that request and put in his resignation.
All right, Ritu, thank you so much for taking us through those details. Now, the infighting within CBI took a dramatic turn today, with the Supreme Court coming down hard on Director Alok Verma, who has been shunted by the CVC. Upset over purported leaks to the media, the Chief Justice said attempts by the court to protect the institutions have been defeated. The hearing in this case has been adjourned to the 29th of this month. Ashmit Kumar, who was in the courtroom as the action unfolded, is now with us. Ashmit, what were these leaks that irked the court?
Well, full theatre as far as the Apex Court is concerned. One was not expecting the outbreak that we saw today. One was expecting arguments to take place between the two sides. But the Apex Court, led by the Chief Justice, Justice Gogoi himself, would have nothing of it. Now, keep in mind that there was a lot of word play. There was a lot of joining of the dots, given that there weren't any explicit references made to very specific leaks. There weren't explicit references made to certain articles or publications or to certain persons. But at the same time, through very thinly veiled references, Justice Gogoi made his position quite clear. He made it clear to both the counsels from either side that he's not happy with the leaks. He's not happy with how the leaks documents have been shared. It seems to have been shared with certain agencies. He also made a thinly veiled reference again to M.K. Sinha's petition, which in fact details a great deal of intervention from the government, even mentioning Ajit Doval from the NSA as to how he had been interfering with the CBI. And in response to all of this, Justice Gogoi's assessment was that the judiciary is not a platform for airing of these views. It's a platform. It's a forum for adjudicating on people's rights. He went on to say that he's seeking to maintain the respect of the institution, the CBI, but people are not complying. That this is extremely disappointing, and that he will look to set things right. He will look into the matter, and on the back of that, coming out with a very sharp observation that none of the parties appear deserve to be heard as of today. And on the back of that, what he's done is that he's deferred the hearing until November 29th on the back of these sharp words, reprimanding counsels from both the sides, essentially taking exception to these leaks. Now, what is the implication? What does it mean? It's open to speculation right now, but more clarity is awaited, and November 29th perhaps is when we can get some from the Apex Court on the road forward as far as the CBI battle is concerned. Back to you.
Absolutely, Ashmit, a high day of drama, but 29th is when we'll know more. Thank you so much for those details. But with that, we're completely out of time on this edition of Reporter's Diary.